Mike, I
Thank you,
appreciate
Todd.
you taking over. Thank you, Chauncey. Thank you, panelists, Olivia, Tim, Matt. Fantastic discussion. But now we're going to turn it over to a good key partner for FIU and New America. They came on board with us back in 2018 when we took over the conference. And we're going to turn it over to Roy Zur. He is the founder and CEO of Cybint, a cybersecurity education company. He was a retired Israeli Defense Forces major, and Roy has over more than 15 years of experience in cybersecurity and intelligence operations and has developed cyber education programs and solutions for companies, educational institutions, and government agencies around the world. So with that, Roy, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Randy. And it's great being with you again. This time it's a bit different than our last time, but we all need to get used to this new reality. So as Randy mentioned, today what I'm going to focus on is kind of like thinking practically on building a cybersecurity workforce in this COVID era. And I know a lot of discussions right now are going on between the universities and community colleges and industry partners. So I'll try to kind of like contribute from my perspective, which is coming from the Israeli perspective in a way. I mean, that's where I'm coming from. And we had a lot of challenges that we need to deal with before COVID that now I think can be applied pretty well into this COVID era. And maybe just let's move to the next slide to explain kind of like the perspective I'm coming from. So I want to tell you a bit about what's going on in Israel before COVID and in general in the context of cybersecurity training. So as Randy mentioned, I'm coming from the Israeli Cyber Intelligence Unit, Unit A200. So this unit has about 6,000 people, more or less. It's kind of like the Israeli NSA, but in Israel, it's a military unit and it's not an external unit to the military. And the reason I'm saying it is because in Israel, the way you are hiring people or recruiting people to this unit is you only have high school graduates that you can hire or recruit into the unit. Because the way the military works in Israel is that people graduate high school at the age of 18, and then they have this screening process to different military positions. But it also means, if you think about it, that the Israeli Cyber Intelligence Unit, Unit A200, which is considered to be one of the prominent and known units in the context of cybersecurity, both defensive, offensive, intelligence, etc., is mostly based on 18-year-olds. Now, of course, there are in the unit people that stayed a while in the unit and they grew with the unit and they are experts, etc. But if you look at, I would say 70 to 80% of the unit, these are 18-year-olds to 20-year-olds. And the reason is that the compulsory service in Israel, the service in Israel is 3 years max. So if you take a person after high school and you put him to a degree of 2 to 4 years, then they will not have any time to spend in the unit. So the reason I'm kind of like sharing with you this perspective is that even before COVID, even without the context of economic distress, we had to come up with solutions that can take people from zero or underqualified to employed to work in the unit within a matter of, the fastest as possible, as fast as possible, but in general, within a matter of 3 to 6 months. So we can actually get them ready to work, ready to start their career, first in the unit and then in the industry. And when I left the unit, I'm still working with the unit for the past 15 years, first in my service for 10 years, and then later as a consultant. But in general, when I left the unit, I tried to bring this perspective to many organizations I've been working with as a consultant and then with Cybint. Let's move to the next slide. So the context of what we're going to talk about, and we can skip this slide as well. The context of what we are talking about today is when we think about how COVID is now affecting cybersecurity in general, we understand that cybersecurity has always been a concern. This is from the Accenture report from last year, the expected value at risk right now with all the organizations I'm discussing with, where we see decline in budget for everything, almost everything, including IT in general. Specifically in cybersecurity, we see more budget, more money going there, including more people that need to be hired to different positions, and a lot of demand in the market in different regions. Let's move to the next slide. And in this context, we need to understand that we're looking at it when we talk with organizations, with employers in the industry, whether they are big corporations or mid-sized organizations, we understand that the human factor is maybe their biggest concern right now. I mean, in the context of cybersecurity. So when a lot of time we think about the CISO, thinking about technologies, processes, and people. So people are with most of the organizations we discuss with, and in most of the research that I've been reviewing in the past years, we understand that the weakest link in cybersecurity is the human factor. And usually we tend to see them as two main groups. One group is of course the people who are actually doing cybersecurity, whether these are the SOC analysts, the SOC operators, the threat hunters, the forensics, the incident response teams, et cetera, but also the other people that are not doing cybersecurity but need to understand cybersecurity. These can be different executives. These can be people from compliance, risk, fraud, up to the general employees that need to have some level of what is used to be called awareness. And we kind of think about it as beyond awareness, like where you can give them the skills that can actually allow them to function better and also to protect their organization better. Now, if we focus on the context, right, of the security team members, and let's move to the next slide, then in general, within this group of security team members, we tend to focus on two big problems. And I know this audience is well aware of these problems, but it's important to provide a context before we move to the, let's say, before we move to the specific solutions that I want to offer, or want to offer the thinking about these solutions. One is the talent shortage. So, it's a very common thing to say now, the talent shortage in cybersecurity. But what's interesting is that if we measure the demand, pre-COVID, post-COVID, not only that the demand for workforce in cybersecurity didn't go down like in many other areas in the industry that are now in distress, the demand for cybersecurity experts, for cybersecurity professionals, is actually on the rise. And it's interesting that significant part of the demand for different cybersecurity position is actually looking also for entry-level positions in the US and across the world. Just 2 days ago, I was a keynote at a conference in Hong Kong, of course, virtual conference. And the Asia Pacific region is facing significant problems as well, from Singapore to Indonesia, through Europe, and of course, to the United States. So one area that we need to address is the talent shortage. And the other area we need to address is the skills gap, meaning once people are already in the industry, still majority of organizations report that their employees are underqualified. Because as you know, in cybersecurity, the fact that I had the skills and I landed, like I got the job, now the field is ever changing. The question is, how we can stay up to date, how we can stay relevant with the skills, and what's the role of higher education in this question. And I think that this is one of the key things that I want to cover today. Let's skip to the next slide, and we can skip. Next slide. Yeah. So in the context of the U.S. challenge, then you are aware of that if we look at supply-demand ratio in the United States in general, we see that the supply of cybersecurity workers is very low, which is a challenge. But for us, for the education space, is also an opportunity because we can play a very active role in solving this problem. Let's skip to the next slide. Now, what I want to talk about, and here when I'm trying to get it more practical, let's say, is to kind of like talk about the old paradigm versus the new paradigm, and how higher education in general and higher education specifically, can start thinking about programs that will focus on employability of students, of learners. Okay, even the definition of students versus learners, we'll get to it in a minute. So the first click is when we think about the old paradigm of what used to be the main criticism around degree programs or higher education is the fact that it needs to be theoretical. We need to go to we need to dive deep into the kind of like the foundations before we can practice. before we can go to the actual what's happening in the field. And it makes sense because degrees and higher education in general is very research oriented, at least in research institutions. But let's click on the new paradigm in that case. And next one is moving to hands-on approach, meaning, for example, implementing without even sometimes before we cover all the foundations, how we can integrate from the first year in school, how we can integrate components that are much more hands-on, specifically in cybersecurity, dealing with real-life problems and not just the theory behind cybersecurity, especially because cybersecurity by itself is a very practical field. I mean, of course, there is a lot of research in the field of cybersecurity, but it's much more in practice than in theory. And this is a field that is changing so rapidly that you also need to be always ahead of the curve and make sure you have the right skills at any given point. Let's click the next one. So another thing that a lot of time we think about the old paradigm is lagging. I mean, around the degree programs. And again, I'm not criticizing, of course. It's just a process of curriculum mapping and curriculum approval. And I've worked with higher education in many countries, Israel, US, just getting something into the curriculum, change the curriculum. A lot of times it's a very slow process. And in fields that are changing on a monthly basis, a lot of times it's just not necessarily relevant to keep studying the same curriculum as we studied even last semester, right? Nevertheless, I mean, if we're talking about like 3 years ago, and the process is really complicated. So if we move to the new paradigm, click there, we need to think about how to make the training or the content or the learning evergreen. And when I say evergreen, means that I like to call it threat-based, meaning that we need to look at the threat landscape like we do in the industry. We need to look at the threat landscape and understand what the students need to learn, what skills, what tools they need to acquire to be equipped to deal with the relevant threats. So when they go out to the industry, they actually know how to deal with real life problems. Click next. We are talking about in the old paradigm, something that is more generic, meaning higher education. You come to the classroom, it can be also online, but you go in the classroom, there are 10, 50, 500 people, never mind, in a classroom, and they're all studying the same thing at the same pace, with the same exam, with everything is the same, because eventually it's difficult to create, program customized for every learner. But in the new paradigm, click, we can think about learning that is much more adaptive. I mean, technology allows us to identify gaps that specific people have, to identify where everyone starts. And even if we have a professor, even if we manage a classroom, people can move in different pace. People can start in different points and then they maybe end up at different points. I mean, it's kind of like when we have exams, the maximum is 100, but we don't know where we or A plus, never mind, but we don't know where this person can get. And also maybe we don't know where they started. Maybe the progress they made is something we want to measure. So think about it as much more adaptive in the learning is really important. Click. Now, another thing when we compare the old paradigm to the new paradigms, a lot of time it's in the old paradigm, the learning by itself sometimes is really inefficient. I mean, it's slow, it takes a lot of time. And if we need to solve talent shortage right now in the market, then a 4-year degree is, again, will provide great foundations. But the problem is that a 4-year degree starting today will solve the problems of 2025. And we want to solve the problem of 2020 or 2021. So when we think about, click here, the new paradigm, then when we move to the new paradigm, we need to think about programs that are accelerated. By the way, it doesn't contradict the context or the concept of degrees. Degrees are important, are great for the research and also to bring people with much stronger foundation to the industry. Also, the employers are looking sometimes, a lot of employers focus more on skills, but still they see the benefit of also having the degree. Now, it doesn't contradict. You can have accelerated programs. So some students can start working and get work experience while they do their degrees or even before they do their degree. Going back to the Israeli story, all the people that served with me in the unit, including myself, went to the unit, did an accelerated program, started working, then finished the time in the unit, got a degree, and got back to the industry. So this doesn't have to be this path that is kind of like from high school to degree programs to industry. We can think about accelerated ways to do it. Click next. Then another thing is the teacher-centered click versus the learner-centered. So if we compare the teacher-centered and the learner-centered, it's kind of like go back to the generic versus adaptive. Like, who is in the focus of our attention? Is it the success of the learner or the ability of the teacher to provide the content? And I think that one of the things that technology allows us is to think how we can make it more learner-centered, again, around adaptiveness, around assessment that goes specifically to the needs of every student. Click next. And specifically, as I said before, click from research-oriented, which is one super important thing, but not what I'm talking about today, to career-oriented. Now, we can solve both problems, right? It doesn't need to contradict, but if we want to be career-oriented, we need to address these things of hands-on, evergreen, adaptive, accelerated, and learner-centered. Click next. Now, specifically, if I'm going back to the story I started with, then in Israel, it was a necessity. Like, regardless of COVID, it was a necessity. Like, we have to take thousands of people every year out of high school and place them in Unit A200, right? I mean, we don't have any other way to get them. So we had to come up with a reskilling program that will take maximum 6 months and hopefully 3 months. And that's where our cyber boot camps were, that's where they were born, because we had to solve this, this problem of taking people from what we like to say 0 to employ. Maybe it sounds a bit offensive, but from underqualified to qualified to work in cybersecurity positions within 3 to 6 months. And then once they're in the unit, we can keep upskilling them, like with workshops and other, I mean, they're not perfectly equipped to deal with everything, but they're definitely equipped to start working, and to start getting the experience they need, because eventually also in the industry will look for this experience. Click next. Now, specifically, if you think about the current situation, right? So if we had this necessity, then now the current situation of COVID, take this problem on a global scale, right? So a lot of people feel this discontent with the current situation. Either they're unemployed or they feel that they're not going anywhere with their, with their professional lives. And also higher education is in the situation of, reinvent higher education. What can we do? So this is actually an opportunity for progress, an opportunity to start thinking a bit differently about what we want to do with I would say, practical solutions for cybersecurity employability. Next. Now, let's talk about the solutions. So I want to address 2 types of solutions to kind of like share with you in our thinking process. And one of the solutions, what is called boot camps, is kind of like lives a bit outside of the current paradigm, meaning it's not part of the degree program. And the other one, kind of like simulated labs and tools and environments that we can integrate within the degree programs. By the way, of course, I will give the examples from my perspective in Cybint, but it doesn't matter if we are using one company or another, you develop it yourself. Let's try to think about it conceptually. So let's click on the bootcamp side. So when we think about boot camps, right? What is a boot camp? A lot of time you think boot camp has to be like in a classroom environment, but no, boot camps can be even online. Boot camp is a process where you take someone from no knowledge or no skills to employ, and you do it with in an accelerated pace within a few months. Ideally, the boot camp will still be like a cohort, right? Like run as a cohort and click next. And it can either be online or it can be in a classroom environment. Of course, now with COVID situation, then a lot of the boot camps, at least those that we are running, we move them online and we develop them in a way that they can live both, both online and also, of course, on-prem. So the context of bootcamp click next, is I would say a lot of time I like to say there is one KPI, one success measure for the bootcamp, only one, employability. If the students or the learners didn't get a job at a certain amount of time, we used to say up to 6 months after the bootcamp, then the bootcamp failed. I mean, from our perspective. So the KPI that we measure is actual employability. It means that the bootcamp has to think about it in advance, kind of like reverse engineering of the needs of the employers. It means that we need to start the discussion with the employers in our region, understand how many job openings there are in the region. We don't want to train too many people and then they will not get a job. We need to understand specifically how many. We need to understand the type of skills that the employers need. And then we need to make sure that the programs will fit these requirements. Also that the employers will have the ability to measure the fit, either with specific data that we can showcase, etc. And also that there will be a mechanism to match the graduates and the employers in a specific place. So specifically, that's a lot of the things we are doing at Cybint today. Now click next. What we are doing today at Cybint is creating this global network of what we call cyber centers, which in my point of view, the importance here, and again, regardless of Cybint, is this collaboration approach, meaning that the fact that different schools operate similar programs and create this standardized program, share ideas, share challenges, also share needs from different employers, because some employers have branches in different cities, have headquarters in different cities, etc. There's a lot of things that we can think on how we can, use this, I would say, broader context of the network. Click next. Now, specifically, what we've been doing, for example, recently with Southern New Hampshire University, is that we even wanted to test it with different types of students. One of the groups of students we tested, for example, this bootcamp approach, click next, was actually a group of refugees in the GEM, in this global education program that SNU, that Southern New Hampshire University is operating, and also taking people from refugee camps around Africa and the Middle East and get them a job either in their countries or in other places. Some of them are not allowed to work in the countries they're at right now, or to connect them with other employers around the world, to MSSPs, et cetera. And this was proved to be a big success that we are now replicating with SNU, and of course, working with other populations. Click next. Now, specifically, when we think about, and another click or a few clicks, when we think about the bootcamp paradigm, then we take the same things we discussed, right? Hands-on, evergreen, adaptive, click next a few more times, great. Accelerated, learner-centered, and career-oriented. Then we need to make sure that the bootcamp paradigm will fit these 6 things. So a typical school that decide to operate a bootcamp program will usually run the bootcamp in parallel to the degree programs, meaning it doesn't have to fit the regular school year. If a bootcamp, a typical bootcamp is a 12-week effort, 3-month effort, then in most schools we are working with, there are 4 bootcamps running per year. Sometimes there's a few running in parallel, but 4 bootcamp running per year, and every bootcamp train about 25 people. And of course, sometimes some bootcamps run in parallel. So in that case, the school generates 100 people that are ready to work, and also help them with, of course, with Cybint in that case, to connect them between the school and the employer. So if we click next there, the other point of view that we can address is if a school doesn't think that let's say a bootcamp makes sense, or doesn't have the capacity or the ability or the willingness to operate a bootcamp in parallel to the school year, a lot of the schools we are working with are actually integrating just more technologies and tools within their degree program. So it's kind of like taking the bootcamp, breaking it to its components, the simulations, the labs, etc., and then click next. It's kind of like using the bootcamp as if it was I like to call it hands-on textbook, right? It's kind of like a textbook that's always being updated and changed according to the threats. And then it's kind of like it fits the concept of the bootcamp is just being provided more within the degree program and within the courses and not separately. Click next. So to summarize these 2 points, right? When we think about bootcamps, a lot of time it's outside of the degree. We are doing reskilling. So for example, Cybint partners with different schools. We plug in, plugging our bootcamp platform. We explain this, we kind of like train the school on how to use it. And then we attract learners and we place them in different corporations around it. So this is pure reskilling. And then when we think about the simulations and labs, like the tools within the degree, a lot of time we kind of think about it as skilling because these are still students that are already learning either computer science or other technical fields. So, but in both ways, we are increasing their employability. Click next. Now, when we think about eventually how we look at it is to build cybersecurity ecosystems in different places around the world. Is the collaboration between the education and the industry in reskilling people, placing them. Then later, I didn't address this in this talk because we didn't have time, of course, the upskilling side, kind of like the industry can keep then sending employees to the school for mini workshops and programs. And at least from our perspective at Cybint, we see that if we plug in this engine, this bootcamp engine, then we can make this thing really, really efficient. Next. Now, in that case, the reason for this talk is, to kind of like understand that one of the main challenges we have right now is the challenge to reskilling the workforce and upskilling the industry in cybersecurity. And from my point of view, higher education, including universities, community colleges, and other players in the education space must play a significant key part in this effort because the industry is looking at us. I mean, talk about the corporations and the employers are looking at us to help them solve this problem. I thank you so much for the time, and I hope this talk was beneficial and useful for you. Thank you.
Roy, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. I know you're halfway across the world, so we're happy with you coming to us. And for those in attendance that are interested in seeing more from Roy and Cybint, they are in the exhibit hall. I encourage you to check it out and talk to them directly and ask your questions. So a few more housekeeping notes before we head off to the next. So if we could get the slides up, please. Perfect. Our exhibit hall is now from 2:45 to 3:15. So if you look at that, we will be going to our next breakout sessions. Next slide, please. Starting at 3:15 p.m. Right. So career discovery, talent lifecycle, learning ecosystem, and effective leadership. We have those 4 sessions. Go to 6Connect breakout sessions, or if you're having trouble with 6Connect, go to your email from 9:30 a.m. Eastern time this morning from the NICE team, and you'll be able to go to things. One last final reminder, and this is for later tonight. Next slide, please. We have our evening reception event. Please join us for that. Your camera can be on, your microphone can be on. You can interact with our experts one-on-one, and we will have a series of networking and breakout sessions. This will be led by Heather Ricudio from IBM Security, Christopher Paris from U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and Shatrice Mosley from Indiana Department of Homeland Security. We'll be talking about demystifying the cybersecurity workforce, so getting rid of all those myths related to the cybersecurity field. So looking forward to having you all there, 5 p.m. This will be in the networking lounge. So if you go to networking lounge, you'll see the link you'll be able to click, join there, and we look forward to seeing you there. Without further ado, enjoy your exhibit hall break. Check out our exhibitors. There is a question in the networking hall. We hope that you're able to answer, and we look forward to seeing you at 3:15 p.m. Eastern. Thank you.